No one had asked Amelia Fairfax to dance in years. Not at Lady Weatherby's ball, not at any assembly in London, not even once during 15 long seasons of polite society. So when a deep voice beside her murmured, "May I have this dance?" Amelia assumed it was meant for someone else. The ballroom glittered beneath a forest of crystal chandeliers. Music swelled from the orchestra balcony and laughter rolled across the polished floor where silk skirts turned like drifting clouds. Amelia stood near the tall windows where the shadows gathered, exactly where women like her belonged. She kept her eyes lowered, clutching her ivory fan so tightly that the delicate ribs creaked beneath her gloves. The sound was swallowed instantly by the noise of the room. It had always been this way. 15 seasons of standing politely against walls. 15 seasons of watching other women dance. By 20, she had been known as that quiet Fairfax girl. By 25, she was spoken of with pity. And at 32, she was simply no longer noticed at all. A shadow stopped beside her, tall, broad-shouldered. The faint scent of rain and tobacco clung to him. Amelia prepared for the familiar moment, when someone almost noticed her before remembering she was invisible. But the man did not move on. Instead, his voice came again, low, calm, certain. "Forgive me," he said quietly, "but would you grant me the honor of the next dance?" Amelia blinked. Surely he was mistaken. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted her eyes, and the air vanished from her lungs. Christian Harrington, Duke of Harrington, was standing directly before her. Even Amelia, who rarely followed society gossip, knew that name. The Duke who never attended balls. The Duke who refused every marriage proposal placed before him. The Duke whose estates hosted poets and painters instead of politicians and dukes. Some called him eccentric, others called him dangerous. Most simply called him impossible. And now he was waiting for her answer. All around them, the orchestra began the opening notes of a waltz. Amelia could feel the shift in the room like a sudden change in weather. People were watching, dozens of eyes turning, fans pausing mid-flutter, whispers spreading through the crowd. Why is the Duke of Harrington speaking to her? Amelia's heart began to race. She knew exactly what would follow. Tomorrow morning, the drawing rooms of London would speak of this moment. They would laugh. They would speculate. Some would pity her. Others would accuse her of ambition. Yet for the first time in years, she did not care. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible above the music. But the Duke heard. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Christian extended his gloved hand. When Amelia placed hers upon it, something stirred in her chest. Something small, something fragile, something she had buried years ago. Hope. He guided her onto the dance floor with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. The crowd parted. Whispers rippled behind them. Amelia's pulse thundered in her ears. "I must warn you," she murmured faintly as they began the first steps of the waltz. "I have not danced in some time." Christian's mouth curved slightly. "That," he said gently, "is easily remedied." His hand rested lightly at her back. The touch was steady, warm even through layers of silk. Amelia focused desperately on the rhythm. One step, turn, another step, yet the world around them felt strangely distant. "You forgot to breathe," he said softly. She startled. "I beg your pardon?" His dark eyes flickered with quiet amusement. "You forgot to breathe," he repeated. "If you continue like this, you will faint. And I confess I am dreadful at catching fainting ladies." Despite herself, Amelia almost smiled. Almost. "You need not trouble yourself long, Your Grace," she said carefully. "I am certain the dance will end soon." "Christian," he corrected. She blinked. "My name," he continued calmly, "is Christian." The words felt strangely intimate in the middle of the crowded ballroom. "And yours?" "Amelia," she said. A pause, then quietly. "Amelia Fairfax." He repeated it as though committing it to memory. "Amelia." The orchestra swelled. They turned again across the floor. For the first time in years, Amelia felt the eyes of the entire room upon her. Not with indifference, but with astonishment. The Duke of Harrington dancing with the forgotten spinster. Yet Christian seemed completely unaware of the spectacle. His gaze remained steady on hers. "You are very quiet," he said. "I have had practice." "With silence?" "With being overlooked." Something in his expression shifted. Not pity, never pity. Something deeper. "Recognition." "Yes," he said quietly. "I suspected as much." The music slowed. The waltz drifted toward its final notes. Reluctantly, he released her hands. Amelia curtsied. "Thank you for the dance, Your Grace." "Christian," he corrected again. Then after a small pause, "Until we meet again, Miss Fairfax." He turned and disappeared into the crowd before she could answer. Amelia remained standing where he had left her. Her heart still racing, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, and when she finally looked up, every person in the ballroom was staring at her, among them, approaching swiftly with rigid fury, her aunt. "Amelia," Lady Constance said coldly, "we are leaving." But as Amelia followed her toward the doors beneath the weight of 100 curious gazes, she realized something extraordinary. For the first time in 15 seasons, she had not been invisible, and that realization was far more dangerous than humiliation. Because once a woman had been seen, she could never return comfortably to the shadows again. The carriage ride home was silent. Lady Constance Fairfax did not speak until the wheels of the hired carriage had turned twice around the corner from Lady Weatherby's house. Only then did she close her fan with a sharp snap that sounded almost like a reprimand. "Explain yourself." Amelia sat opposite her aunt, hands folded tightly in her lap. "There is nothing to explain," she said quietly. "His Grace asked for a dance. That is precisely what requires explanation." Lady Constance's voice was tight with contained alarm. "The Duke of Harrington does not ask women like you to dance." Amelia flinched, not because the words were cruel, but because they were accurate. Women like her, unmarried past 30, modest fortune, no powerful relations, did not attract the attention of dukes. They were useful at teas, dependable at charity functions, invisible everywhere else. "I did not invite him to ask," Amelia said gently. "That hardly matters now." Lady Constance's gaze hardened. Half the ballroom saw it. Amelia turned her eyes toward the carriage window where the gas lamps of London drifted past like distant stars. Then half the ballroom must have been terribly bored. Her aunt stared at her in astonishment. Amelia Fairfax did not usually answer back. "You will not encourage this nonsense," Lady Constance said sharply. "Do you understand me?" "I have done nothing." "That remains to be seen." The carriage rolled on through the dark streets of Bloomsbury, carrying with it the heavy silence of a scandal not yet born. But the scandal had already begun. The next morning, London awoke hungry for gossip. In drawing rooms across Mayfair, ladies sipped tea while exchanging the same astonished question. "Did you hear about Harrington? The Duke who refuses every debutante?" "Yes, that one." "And who did he choose to dance with?" "A woman named Fairfax." Brows lifted. Fans fluttered. "Fairfax? I don't believe I know the family." "Exactly." By afternoon, the story had grown. Some claimed the Duke had danced twice with her. Others insisted he had spoken to her for an entire quarter hour. A few more imaginative storytellers suggested he had looked deeply interested. None of them knew the truth. But truth was never required in London, only intrigue. 3 days later, Amelia walked quietly beside her aunt in Hyde Park. It was the fashionable promenade hour. Carriages rolled slowly along Rotten Row while riders showed off magnificent horses and carefully practiced indifference. Amelia had returned to her usual habits, eyes lowered, steps careful, invisible once more. Or at least, she was trying to be, because the truth was that she felt it. The difference, the glances, the whispers. People were noticing her now, not kindly, but unmistakably. "Keep your head down," Lady Constance murmured. "The entire park appears determined to stare." Amelia did not argue, but inside something had shifted. Once a woman had stepped briefly into the light. Darkness felt different, almost suffocating. They had nearly reached the end of the path when the sound of a horse stopping nearby made several ladies gasp. Amelia felt the shift in the air before she saw him. A tall figure dismounted from a black stallion with effortless grace. The whispers began immediately. "The Duke of Harrington. What is he doing here?" Amelia's pulse stumbled. "Surely."
"No."
He would not. But when she lifted her eyes, Christian Harrington was walking directly toward them. Every step deliberate, every gaze in the park following him. Lady Constance stiffened beside her like a drawn bow. "Good afternoon, Lady Constance." His voice was calm, respectful, infuriatingly composed. "Your Grace," her aunt replied tightly. Christian inclined his head. Then his attention shifted, entirely, to Amelia. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The autumn light filtered through the trees, touching the moss-green fabric of her walking dress. "You look well, Miss Fairfax," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Christian," he corrected again. Lady Constance's fan snapped open sharply. Christian ignored it. "I wondered," he continued mildly, "if you might allow me to introduce you to my sister when she arrives in London next week. Lady Catherine has been searching desperately for sensible company." Amelia blinked in surprise. She knew perfectly well what he was doing, offering a socially acceptable reason to know her, an introduction that even Lady Constance could not politely refuse. Her aunt's lips tightened, but refusing a duke in Hyde Park with half of London watching was impossible. That would be agreeable, Amelia said softly. Christian's eyes warmed slightly. Excellent. They spoke only a few minutes more. Polite conversation. Nothing scandalous. Nothing improper. Yet when he finally mounted his horse again, the whispers in the park had grown louder than ever, and Amelia knew, with a strange mixture of dread and wonder, her quiet life had already begun to change, whether she wished it or not. By the following week, the whispers had grown sharper. They followed Amelia into drawing rooms, into tea visits, even into the quiet aisles of church. Not loud enough to confront, but never quiet enough to ignore. She's the one Harrington noticed. Imagine at her age. Perhaps he enjoys rescuing hopeless cases. Amelia pretended not to hear. Years of polite society had taught her that survival often depended on silence. Yet the words still stung, because beneath the mockery lived something worse. Curiosity. People were watching her now, waiting to see whether the Duke of Harrington would continue his strange attention or abandon it as suddenly as it had begun. 3 days after the promenade in Hyde Park, Amelia attended a small literary exhibition in Bloomsbury. It was the sort of event Lady Constance approved of. Quiet, respectable, safe. Painters and poets displayed their work in a modest gallery while polite guests moved slowly from painting to painting, discussing meaning with solemn importance. Amelia preferred such gatherings. No orchestra, no dancing, no expectation of charm. She stood before a small landscape painting when she heard a familiar voice behind her. You dislike it. Her heart skipped. Christian Harrington stood beside her, not in formal court dress this time, but in a dark coat and simple cravat that somehow made him appear even more striking. I do not dislike it, Amelia said carefully. You pity it. She turned slightly, surprised by the quiet certainty in his voice. How can you tell? Christian studied the painting. A landscape painted by a man who has never truly walked through the countryside, he said calmly. The trees are too perfect. Amelia stared at him. That is exactly what I thought. His mouth curved faintly. Yes. The moment settled between them, unexpectedly easy. Around them, the gallery buzzed with conversation, but somehow the space beside him felt strangely private. Are you enjoying the exhibition? She asked. Christian shrugged. I came because my mother insisted that London requires occasional participation. And now? Now, he said quietly. I'm glad I listened to her. Amelia felt warmth rise to her cheeks. Across the room, 2 matrons were already watching them with thinly disguised interest. You should not stand with me too long, she murmured. Why? You know why. Christian's gaze drifted briefly across the gallery where the whispers had already begun. Then he looked back at her. Because they are talking? Yes. He was silent for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. They have always talked. She frowned slightly. But they talk about you. Indeed. And you do not mind? Christian's expression softened in a way that surprised her. Miss Fairfax, I have been the subject of scandal since I was 22. His voice carried no arrogance, only weary amusement. If I began worrying about gossip now, I would have to abandon London entirely. Amelia laughed softly before she could stop herself. The sound startled both of them. It had been years since she had laughed so easily. Christian noticed, and something quiet moved behind his eyes. You should do that more often, he said. What? Laugh. The warmth returned instantly to her cheeks. Society might not approve. Society, he replied dryly, rarely approves of anything worthwhile. At that moment, a gentleman passing behind Amelia bumped her shoulder without even glancing back. It was the sort of small dismissal she had endured countless times. But this time, Christian saw it. His expression hardened. Sir, he said sharply. The gentleman stopped, startled. You owe Miss Fairfax an apology. The man flushed under the cold weight of the Duke's gaze. My apologies, madam. He bowed quickly and hurried away. Amelia stared at Christian in astonishment. You did not need to do that. Yes, he said calmly. I did. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he added quietly, people should look where they are going. But Amelia understood. He had not corrected the man for clumsiness. He had corrected him for not seeing her, and something deep inside her chest shifted again, because for the first time in years, someone had chosen to notice. Christian Harrington had spent 10 years mastering indifference. It had become something of an art. He attended society when necessary, avoided it when possible, and kept the entire world at a comfortable distance. It was simpler that way. Safer. But now there was Amelia Fairfax, and she refused to leave his thoughts. He saw her everywhere, in the quiet of his library at Harrington House, in the stillness of early morning rides through Hyde Park, even in the poetry books scattered across his desk. He had not meant to notice her that night at Lady Weatherby's ball, yet the image would not release him. A woman in gray standing quietly beside the curtains, ignored, forgotten, alone in a crowded room. It had stirred something inside him he had buried years ago. Recognition. Christian knew that loneliness. He had lived with it for a decade. The letter arrived on a gray afternoon. His butler placed it on a silver tray beside the desk. A message for your grace. Christian broke the seal absent-mindedly, then paused. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature was not. Lady Constance Fairfax. His brow lifted slightly. He read the letter slowly. Your Grace, I write to express gratitude for your courtesy toward my niece during recent gatherings. The words were perfectly polite, but the tone beneath them was unmistakable. Cold, careful, calculating. However, I feel it necessary to mention that Miss Fairfax is a woman of quiet disposition who has no wish to become the subject of society's speculation. Christian's mouth tightened slightly. He continued reading. Any further public attentions may unintentionally place her in a difficult position. The message was clear.
Leave her alone.
He placed the letter down and leaned back in his chair. Lady Constance feared exactly what London had already begun whispering, that the Duke of Harrington had taken an interest in her forgotten niece, and that such interest could ruin her. The logic was not entirely unreasonable. Christian had seen society destroy reputations over far less. He rose slowly and walked toward the tall windows overlooking Berkeley Square. Rain had begun to fall against the glass. For a long moment he simply stood there, thinking, because Lady Constance had misunderstood one crucial detail. His interest in Amelia Fairfax had never been amusement. It was something far more dangerous. It was recognition. 10 years earlier, Christian had believed in love. He had been 22, young enough to imagine the world could be shaped by loyalty and courage. Her name had been Beatrice Thornton. Beautiful, bright, and very aware of the power her beauty carried. Christian had asked her to marry him, against his father's wishes, against society's expectations. She had said yes. For 6 glorious months he had believed himself the happiest man in England, until the letter arrived. Not from her, from a mutual acquaintance. Beatrice Thornton had married the Earl of Westbury, a man twice her age, and 3 times as wealthy. She had not written to explain. She had not even said goodbye. Christian had learned everything from strangers. 3 months later his father died, leaving him the dukedom he had once been told he would never inherit if he pursued such foolish attachments. The irony had been almost laughable. Since then, Christian Harrington had trusted no one. He had kept the world at arm's length, and his heart carefully locked away, until a quiet woman in a gray dress had looked up at him in a ballroom with astonishment so genuine it had taken his breath away. Amelia Fairfax did not calculate. She did not scheme. She barely seemed aware that a duke's attention might change her life. And that simple honesty frightened him more than betrayal ever had, because it meant something terrible. It meant she could hurt him, without even meaning to. Christian closed his eyes briefly, then returned to his desk. He took out a sheet of paper and began writing a reply to Lady Constance. The words were brief, polite, controlled. My dear Lady Constance, you may rest assured that I have no intention of causing your niece distress. He paused before finishing, because that sentence was both true and a lie. He did not wish to hurt Amelia, but the simple fact that he was thinking about her this much already meant the danger had begun. The invitation arrived on a pale October morning. Amelia recognized the seal immediately, a small silver crest pressed into cream-colored wax. Harrington House. Her fingers hesitated before opening it. Lady Constance watched from the breakfast table with visible suspicion. Well, her aunt demanded. Amelia unfolded the letter slowly. It is from the Duchess of Harrington, she said. Lady Constance nearly dropped her teacup. The Duchess? Yes. Amelia read the words again to be certain she had not misunderstood. Lady Harrington requests the pleasure of Lady Constance Fairfax and Miss Amelia Fairfax for afternoon tea at Harrington House this Thursday. Silence filled the room. Then Lady Constance spoke carefully. That cannot be refused. Amelia nodded. Refusing a duchess would be social suicide. Yet something in her chest fluttered with nervous anticipation, because there was only one reason she could imagine for such an invitation. Christian. Harrington House in Berkeley Square was magnificent, not ostentatious, but quietly powerful. Tall windows reflected the autumn sunlight while ivy climbed gracefully along the stone walls. Inside, the drawing room was filled with warm afternoon light and the soft scent of lavender. Amelia sat beside Lady Constance holding a delicate porcelain teacup she feared might shatter in her hands. Across from them sat the Duchess of Harrington. She was not what Amelia expected. Instead of the cold, aristocratic severity Amelia had feared, the Duchess possessed intelligent eyes and a smile that seemed genuinely kind. "You must forgive my curiosity, Miss Fairfax," Lady Harrington said warmly. "My son rarely speaks about anyone." Amelia felt heat rise gently to her cheeks. "I am afraid I've done nothing to deserve such attention." The Duchess's smile deepened. "Christian disagrees." Amelia's breath caught. At the far end of the room, Christian Harrington stood beside the tall windows. He appeared to be reading, but Amelia could feel his gaze on her from across the room. Warm, steady, dangerous. She tried not to look back. Failed. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment. Her heart stumbled. Lady Harrington leaned forward slightly. "My son tells me you enjoy poetry." Amelia blinked. "I do, my lady." "And your favorite?" Amelia hesitated, then answered honestly, "Keats." The Duchess clapped her hands softly. "Wonderful, a true romantic." Amelia smiled shyly. "A thing of beauty is a joy forever." Across the room, Christian slowly lowered his book. Their eyes met again. This time he did not look away. The look he gave her was not polite interest. It was something deeper, something raw, something that made her pulse race. The conversation continued easily after that. Lady Harrington spoke of gardens and literature. Lady Constance relaxed slightly as the afternoon passed without scandal. But Amelia felt the invisible thread between herself and Christian the entire time, unspoken, magnetic, dangerous. When the visit ended and they moved into the corridor to depart, Christian finally approached her. Lady Constance was occupied speaking with the Duchess. For a moment, they were alone. "Keats," he said quietly. Amelia looked up. "Yes." "I would not have guessed." Something bold flickered inside her. "Why?" Christian studied her carefully. "Because Keats believed love was worth suffering for." "And you do not?" A shadow passed briefly through his expression. "I once did." The honesty in his voice startled her. "And now?" she asked softly. Christian hesitated, then answered with quiet gravity, "Now I believe some risks are too dangerous to take." The words hung between them. Amelia felt something tighten in her chest. Yet before she could reply, Lady Constance called sharply from the hall, "Amelia." She stepped back reluctantly. Christian watched her go, but as she reached the door he spoke again, quiet enough that only she could hear. "I am glad you came today." Amelia did not answer, but the small smile she carried into the carriage followed her all the way home. Because for the first time in years, hope had begun to grow, and hope, she realized with sudden clarity, was the most dangerous emotion of all. For 2 weeks, Christian Harrington avoided Amelia Fairfax. He did it with the cold precision of a man who had spent years perfecting distance. He stopped riding through Hyde Park at the fashionable hour. He declined invitations where he suspected she might appear. He even refused his mother's gentle attempts to mention her name. Outwardly, nothing had changed. The Duke of Harrington still hosted his eccentric literary gatherings, still appeared occasionally at theaters and galleries, still carried himself with the same calm confidence London had come to expect. But inside everything had changed, because every time he forced himself to stay away, he remembered her. The quiet way she spoke of poetry, the fragile courage behind her eyes, the small smile she had given him in the hallway of his own house. It would be better this way. That was what he told himself. Better for her, better for both of them, because if society had already begun whispering, the whispers would become crueler if he continued. Amelia Fairfax had spent years living unnoticed. Christian would not be the man who turned her life into a spectacle. Even if it meant silence, even if it meant hurting her. Amelia noticed immediately. At first she told herself it was coincidence. Perhaps he had traveled. Perhaps he had simply been busy. But days passed. Then more days. And Christian Harrington vanished from her world as suddenly as he had entered it. The absence felt strange, like a room that had grown colder without warning. She continued her ordinary routines. Morning walks, reading in the small library at home, accompanying Lady Constance to tea visits. But everywhere she went she found herself searching crowds without meaning to, looking for a tall figure, dark eyes, the faint scent of bergamot and tobacco. And every time he was not there, the whispers in society shifted again. "Did you hear? Harrington has grown bored already." I suppose the novelty faded. Amelia pretended not to hear, but something fragile inside her chest slowly began to crack. The encounter happened by accident. At least, that was what Christian would later tell himself. He had gone to Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly searching for a new volume of poetry. The quiet shop smelled of paper and ink, a refuge from London's endless noise. Christian was examining a shelf when he saw her. Amelia stood in the poetry aisle holding a small book. Keats, of course. For a moment he simply watched. Something in her expression struck him immediately. The soft light that had begun to grow in her eyes over the past weeks was gone, extinguished, as though someone had quietly blown out a candle, and Christian knew with sudden, brutal clarity. He had done that. His chest tightened painfully. He should leave. That was the sensible choice. Walk away. Allow her to forget him. But before he could move, she sensed him. Amelia turned slowly. Their eyes met. Shock flickered across her face, followed quickly by something far more controlled. Distance, Your Grace, she said politely. The formality cut deeper than anger would have. Amelia, he began, but the words he had rehearsed for days vanished completely. Silence filled the narrow aisle. She closed the book gently. You need not explain, she said softly. He frowned. Explain what? Her lips curved into a faint, tired smile. That it was a mistake. The words landed like a blade. It was not. It is quite all right, she interrupted quietly. I understand. Christian stared at her. No, you do not. Amelia's voice remained calm. You were kind for a short time. I appreciated it more than you know. Kind, the word felt unbearable. I never intended to hurt me, she finished. He stopped, because that was exactly what had happened. She met his gaze steadily. You gave me something I had not felt in years. Hope. Her eyes softened slightly, and then you took it away. The simple honesty struck harder than any accusation. Christian opened his mouth, but no words came, because the terrible truth was this. He had not protected her. He had only wounded her in a different way. Amelia stepped past him quietly. When she reached the door of the shop, she paused briefly, then said without turning, Goodbye, Your Grace, and left. Christian remained standing among the shelves long after she disappeared into the London crowd. Because in trying to protect them both, he had done the one thing he feared most. He had broken her trust. Christian Harrington did not sleep that night, nor the night after. For 10 years he had lived behind carefully constructed walls built from pride, caution, and the memory of betrayal. But Amelia's quiet words in the bookshop had cracked those walls in a way nothing else ever had. You gave me hope, and then you took it away. The truth of it would not leave him. For the first time in years, Christian realized something unbearable. He had not been protecting her. He had been protecting himself. And in doing so, he had hurt the one woman who had never asked anything from him. 2 days later, Marcus Thornley arrived uninvited at Harrington House. Marcus had been Christian's closest friend since childhood and possessed the rare courage to speak plainly. You look dreadful, Marcus said the moment he entered the library. Christian poured himself another glass of brandy. Your concern is touching. Marcus ignored the sarcasm. You love her. Christian froze. The words hung in the air like a bell that could not be unrung. Love, Christian said carefully, is an unreliable condition. Marcus rolled his eyes. For God's sake, Harrington. He leaned forward across the desk. I have watched you brood for 2 weeks like a man attending his own funeral. If that is not love, I should hate to see what it looks like. Christian stared into the fire, and for the first time, he stopped denying it. Yes, he said quietly. Marcus exhaled sharply. Then why are you not with her? Christian laughed bitterly. Because I will ruin her. You already have. The blunt honesty struck home. Marcus continued calmly. You gave her attention, hope, and then silence. London is already whispering. If you disappear now, she will bear the humiliation alone. Christian closed his eyes. Every instinct told him Marcus was right. So what would you have me do? Marcus shrugged. Go to her. Christian scoffed. And say what? The truth. Marcus stood, and then ask her to marry you. An hour later, Christian Harrington stood outside Lady Constance's townhouse in Bloomsbury. For a man who had faced political rivals, ruthless businessmen, and society's scorn, he had never felt more uncertain. The butler opened the door with visible surprise. Your Grace? I must speak with Miss Fairfax. Moments later, Amelia appeared at the top of the staircase. She descended slowly, composed, graceful, and painfully distant. Your Grace, she said politely. Christian's heart twisted. Amelia. Silence stretched between them. Then he said the only words that mattered. I am sorry. She watched him carefully. I know. No, he continued quietly. You do not. He stepped closer. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I stepped away before society destroyed your reputation, it would be kinder. Her voice was soft. And now? Now I know the truth. Christian's gaze held hers steadily. I stepped away because I was afraid. She did not speak, so he continued. I loved someone once. She betrayed that love. Since then, I have trusted no one with my heart. Amelia's expression softened slightly. But you trusted me. Yes. His voice dropped lower, and that terrified me. The hallway fell silent. Christian took another step closer. I love you, Amelia Fairfax. The words came easily now. I love you for your honesty, your courage, and the quiet strength that allowed you to stand invisible for years without bitterness. Tears gathered in her eyes. And if you still have even the smallest place in your heart for me. He sank slowly to one knee. I ask you to become my wife. The world seemed to pause. Amelia stared down at him, the feared Duke of Harrington, a man London believed untouchable, and yet here he was. Vulnerable, hopeful, waiting. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. You truly wish to marry me? Christian smiled faintly. I have never wished for anything more. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I thought you had changed your mind. I changed my courage, he replied. Amelia studied him for a long moment. Then she reached down and took his hand. Yes, she whispered. Christian exhaled as though the world had returned to him. Rising to his feet, he pulled her gently into his arms. For the first time. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the quiet certainty of two lonely hearts finally finding their way to each other. Several months later, the ballroom at Harrington House glittered beneath hundreds of candles. But this time the whispers carried a different tone. Imagine. The Duke of Harrington married her. The woman no one noticed. Christian led Amelia across the dance floor with quiet pride. His duchess, his equal, his choice. And as the music carried them through the waltz, he leaned close and murmured the words that had changed everything. May I have this dance? Amelia smiled, the kind of smile that only comes from finally being seen. Yes, she whispered. Always.